Hey everybody, Gromlos here with a little quick video follow-up to the video I made last week, my Simulator Battle Ground Forces video. The ideas in the video are mainly focused on simulator battles, though I think they have some merit in realistic battle tanks as well. The footage is from simulator tanks mostly, but also from realistic battle tanks, since I just unlocked some British tanks and you still can't use them in simulator battle tanks. So, simulator battle ground forces have, in my opinion, a lot of potential. So much in fact that I think if done right, it could well become the most successful multiplayer tank game out there, surpassing AWF or even World of Tanks. If done right. At the moment, sadly, most will probably just laugh about hearing that idea. Simulator Battle Ground Forces, despite its huge potential, is not just played by a tiny amount of players in comparison with those other games, but not even very successful in comparison with the other game modes in War Thunder itself. And that is a huge pity. Now, I've brought some ideas and feedback on how to improve the Simulator Battle Tank mode last week, and one of those suggestions I wanted to explain in a bit more detail, more precisely the reasons for why I think it is important. Now, among a few other things, I was and still am of the opinion that damage to the tanks and its crew in Simulator Battle mode has far too little effect at the moment. A destroyed gun can be repaired in seconds and a knocked out crew member has very little effect on the performance of the tank. I thought that heavy damage to a tank should require having to return to base to repair, as is the case with planes as well in the game. Also, if you ask any tank expert on what he thinks is the most important part of a tank, the gun or its armor or its engine, he will most likely tell you that the most important thing is the crew of the tank. And I think this should be the case in War Thunder as well. Your crew should be important and losing crew should be felt. Shooting a tank in the side of the turret and taking out its turret crew should have more of an effect, as it does now in most cases in simulator battles. I made some suggestions on how this could be achieved in the last tank video. For example, you could make it so that the crew positions when you lose a crew member can only be changed manually, via a menu like the COM menu. So, for example, you lose the gunner and you want the radio operator to replace it. So you bring up the crew menu and press say 3 for radio operator and then 2 for go to gunner seat. Now, after an appropriate amount of time, the radio operator reaches the gunner seat and takes over the gun and you can use it again. But now you don't have a radio operator, so you can't call in artillery, for example, or ping on the map. You have to send someone to the radio operator station, or the station that is responsible for the radios in case of a tank without a radio operator, if you want to do that. Similarly, if you want your commander to take over a knocked out gunner, you can send him over, but now you don't have a commander's view. Why would you if the commander isn't there? This way you would have to think about the situation a bit more, and losing, for example, a commander would have more of an impact than it has now. I would like to add that the tank should be knocked out when more than 50% of its crew is knocked out. Well, that is one suggestion of how to make the crew matter more. And that is what I want to follow up a bit in this video. Not so much about ways on how to achieve crew damage and tank damage to matter more and have a bigger effect. That can be achieved in different ways. But what I want to further explain is why I think doing that is important for the future of War Thunder Simulator Battleground Forces. Now, just as I'm making this video, Gaijin has brought out a dev blog on some changes in how crew works, and there is one slight similarity to what I suggested just now. I'm aware of that and I'm getting to that. But for now, why do I think damage and crew losses should matter more? Should be more punishing, if you want to say it that way. And I actually think that this is very important for the future of simulator battle tanks. Well, as I've said, I think Simulator Battle Ground Forces has the potential to be the best multiplayer tank game out there. Yet at the moment very few people play simulator battle tanks. Why is that? Well, one of the main reasons I hear when I ask friends that used to play it is it's simply often very frustrating to play, and the frustration often outweighs the fun. And I tend to agree with that. There are often very frustrating experiences in it. But what is the reason for those frustrating experiences? Well, there are different opinions on that, of course, and one you sometimes hear is that it is frustrating because it is too realistic. I've heard some say, well, a realistic tank game just isn't as fun as you guys thought it would be, that people don't want to get killed by one shot as can happen in a realistic tank game. Well, I hope it goes without saying that I disagree with that point of view. I love playing simulators like Steel Armor or Blaze of War. I have a great time with it, and they are way more realistic, not less. Sadly no multiplayer mode in it though. I also played Steel Beasts in the past, the original one even, before the Pro PE version. Also great fun, and Panzer Elite before that, and none of them seemed to have those frustrating experiences that forces many players away from War Thunder simulator battles. So no, I don't think too much realism is the problem. I don't think getting killed by one hit is the problem either. Everybody that plays a game mode called simulator battles expect that this can happen. It can happen in airplanes obviously, not just in simulator battles, even in arcade air battles, and it's not a problem there. No, I think the problem very much lies in the exact opposite direction. Now, the last proper simulator battle tank video I did with commented battles and everything was a long time ago, during the ASB events, the Absolute Simulator Battle events. Those events back then removed the name tags and minimap icons from simulator battles, making them way more realistic, not less. Also, one-shots were more likely back then, and tanks in general needed fewer hits to get taken out, though I remember thinking back then that it was still too much. Anyway, the ASB events were a huge success. As a matter of fact, they massively contributed to War Thunders back then having the highest amount of players ever. I mean consistent player numbers over a longer period of time, not one-day spikes on patch day. War Thunder never had player numbers that high before the ASB events, and did never again since. So, increasing the realism of tanks in simulator battle mode obviously did not reduce the enjoyment of the players. The opposite was the case, a huge amount of people were playing it. Sadly, Gaijin apparently did not see it that way, and instead agreed with those that said that people don't like one-shots, even though I can't remember that particular piece of feedback ever coming from the simulator battle or realistic battle tank players in any kind of numbers. As a result, shortly after the ASB events, we got a patch that introduced a significant change, which I think most of you that play tanks since a while will remember. The likelihood of ammo rack explosions was greatly reduced, from very likely that it goes up with a direct hit, as someone would expect, to being very unlikely, so much so that the full ammo rack being hit is more likely to help you by soaking up shrapnel than to actually explode. As a matter of fact, you will see my tank take lots of hits, including direct hits to the full ammo racks shortly, without them ever going up. The reason given for that back then was to reduce randomness. Yeah, I had a good laugh about that one back then. Of course, the effect was the exact opposite. As I've said even during the Absolute Simulator Battle events, I thought that the tanks could soak up too much damage. The last reliable way when you got into someone's flanks to take the tank out with just 1 or 2 shots in the sight was to aim exactly for the ammo rack. That was the last time you could predict with some certainty if your shot would take out a tank or not if you hit where you aimed and penetrated the armor. Nowadays, you generally have to knock out the crew to destroy a tank. Often, especially with ammo that does not actually have an explosive filler like AB or APCR these days, that means that you have to start hunting crew members inside the enemy tank, individually sniping them. And that's where the actual problem lies. First of all, that is of course extremely unrealistic and has nothing to do with tank combat. I read dozens of biographies from tankers from all nations and time periods. Just to name a few, there would be Otto Carriers' Tigers in the Mud, Panzer Destroyer by Vasily Krysov, or Cutthroats by Robert C. Dick. To just name a few. You know what? In not one of them was it mentioned that you specifically aim for crew positions to take out the crew one by one. One anti-tank shell per crew member. That was never a thing, and I don't think that comes as a big surprise. But more important are the effects this has from the gaming side of things, because this is where the frustration comes from. Because what Gaijin is trying to do is make tanks bullet sponges, just like in World of Tanks, where tanks can survive multiple penetrating hits and keep going and fighting. The problem is, World of Tanks is designed with this kind of action gameplay in mind right from the start, including hit points, so the effect of your hits still stays somewhat predictable. And the whole action-based gameplay is designed to support tanks being able to take multiple hits. War Thunder Simulator Battles is not, it is designed to be more realistic right from the start, with a realistic and detailed damage model. Gaijin, however, tries to mix realism and arcade in a way that just doesn't mix well in an attempt to combat the perceived problem of people not liking one-shots, something that in my opinion never existed. They try to get tanks in War Thunder to soak up as many or more hits as tanks in World of Tanks, but without hit points and a realistic damage model instead, and that just doesn't work, and leads to a lot of randomness and frustrating situations. It also increases the impact of the gun's after penetration effect or damage extremely, and that leads to balancing problems. Another case of where trying to mix realism and arcade doesn't work. APHE rounds with an explosive filler should of course have more of an effect after penetrating than early APCR rounds. I've talked about this in my very first Ground Forces video, as a matter of fact. But thanks to the fact that you have to knock out almost the entire crew of a tank to knock it out and stop it from shooting back at you, artificially increases the importance of the difference, and that leads to balancing problems and frustrations, because it is now so important to knock out as many crew members as possible with one shot that a gun firing solid AP rounds or APCR rounds needs a ludicrous amount of penetrating hits to take out a tank or just keep it from shooting back. The difference just was never so big in reality. If it would have been, the British would have put HE filler in their AP rounds. If it would have been APCR rounds like the Panzergranate 40 or HREP would not have been considered effective, and APDSF would have never been developed. Lots of the tanks that are perceived as overpowered in War Thunder are because they fire armor-piercing high-explosive rounds with a large amount of high-explosive filler, instead of, say, solid AP or APHE rounds with a smaller filler, even though those should be better at anti-tank work. Because having a large HE filler is so important in War Thunder compared to what it should be, some tanks perform better than they should because of the ammo they use, and some worse than they should. If, however, even knocking out a smaller number of crew members would have a more noticeable effect on the tank's performance, or damage to the tank would not be so forgiving and repaired in seconds and completely meaningless, this difference in ammo types would be smaller again, which would be good for balance. Now, as you may know, after World War II, research was done to determine what was the most important fact to win a tank engagement, and it was found that seeing the enemy first and firing first was the most important factor. But in War Thunder that is often not the case, and what type of ammo you carry as well as pure chance is more important, and that is what makes this game often so frustrating. And well, let's take a look at some simple examples of what I mean. This is not meant to show off any kind of good tactics or tanking, just some things about the current damage model from some replays. This is from RB, not SB, but in SB you will find similar situations. In the first example we have a Cromwell with a 6-pounder gun, a 57mm anti-tank gun. The gun fires solid AP shots and has a good penetration. Here we caught the T-34 in the open. I see him first, I fire first, and I penetrate his armor every time. Now let's take a look at it again from the other side and explain what happens. And stop the video occasionally to explain some things. Now I am in a T-34's flank and my shot penetrates the side armor, knocks the engine out and sets it on fire. Now I aim for the crew compartment below the turret next, where the gunner and commander sit, to fire through the thin side armor and hit the gunner to keep the T-34 from firing back in my direction. I do get through and knock out the gunner. Now I do not know how long it will take the T-34 to replace the gunner and start firing back, and from the angle he is sitting at the moment I can't reliably hit the position of the driver and bow gunner anyway without risking to hit the well-angled front, so I keep firing at the crew compartment, hoping to knock out the commander as well, do some other damage to, for example, the cannon, and hit the gunner as soon as he is replaced to keep the T-34 from being able to fire back. Now the T-34 had to put out the fire first, which slowed the crew replacement down. I have hit the crew compartment 3 times by now, doing some damage to equipment, wounding the commander, but not knocking him out. Since there's a huge fuel tank right next to the crew I am firing through all the time, I set the tank on fire a second time. This time the crew compartment should be burning. This time though, the T-34 driver doesn't activate the fire extinguisher right away, and as a result, the gunner is replaced seconds later and the T-34 fires back before I can knock out the replacement gunner. Now, he misses, if because of damage or other reasons I don't know, but the fact is after I have seen the T-34 before he saw me. After I fired first, hitting with 4 penetrating hits, 3 right through the fighting compartment and the turret crew, 2 fires, a knocked out gunner and a wounded commander and an assortment of other damage, the T-34 fires back, and if he would have hit me here, chances are he would have knocked out my tank. He could have won this fight anyway. Now my next shot knocks out the replacement gunner, stopping the T-34 from firing again right away. However, this time the T-34 is not extinguishing a fire, so the gunner is replaced again in seconds. My 5th shot through the fighting compartment fails to knock the gunner out again, so the T-34 fires back a second time, again missing, but again, if he would not have, he would have probably won this fight. One after crossing an open field without cover, not seeing an enemy tank in his flank, taking 6 penetrating hits while sitting in the open and having missed one shot already when he got the chance to fire back. Still could have easily won if that shot would have hit. And I have to say again here, this example is not to show off any tank tactics or to criticize anyone's way of playing, but simply to show why the current bullet sponge damage model can be so frustrating for all those that don't have huge high explosive fillers in their AP rounds. Because doing everything correct can and often is completely meaningless. The damage to the enemy tank and its crew simply isn't having enough of an effect on it, and this is the very reason I get from every one of my friends when I ask why they don't play simulated battle tanks anymore. They just have enough of situations like this, when they don't make a mistake, when they get into the enemy's flank, see the enemy tank first, fire first, penetrate first, multiple times, and then lose anyway, either because the tank they are shooting fires back because crew replacement and repair are so fast, or they get eventually shot in the side because they spent half an hour trying to kill one tank that should be dead already. Instead of firing 1 or 2 shots into the side of a tank and then move back into cover looking for other threats, like it often used to be back when you could still reliably blow up ammo racks at least, though the rest of the damage model was still too forgiving, or if you drive a tank that has a large HE filler. And just to make that clear, the problem does not just exist when you fight T-34s, but all kinds of tanks, and this is something that Gaijin needs to understand. You can't mix realism and arcade in this way. Trying to force tanks that can survive lots of hits without losing their capability to fight into a realistic game mode like simulator battles with a detailed damage model doesn't work. If that is what you want, hit points like World of Tanks work better. Neither is this what players want anyway. Players are not frustrated and leaving because their tank got one-shotted. They are frustrated because if they don't drive a tank with a certain type of ammo, they don't do any damage, leading to lots of randomness and tactics often becoming meaningless. Take a look at simulator or realistic air battles. It would be the same problem here if you would do that. If the developers of air battles would get the idea, oh, people don't like it when they die to a cannon burst, let's make it so you can survive much longer. It would also lead to lots of frustration, like if you ride in a weaker plane than the enemy, and as a result you spend some time climbing, getting into a better position, and then ambushing the enemy plane from above. If your weapons now aren't doing anything, and you have to attack again and again to get results, the enemy in the better plane would eventually get the upper hand and win, and that would also be frustrating. That is the reason why I want damage to tank and crew to matter more in simulator battle tanks, much more as a matter of fact. And that is also of course why I am not too happy about Gaijin's recent announcement that they want to make tanks to be able to soak up even more damage now. According to the dev blog, tanks in the future will still be alive with only 1 crew member alive, not 2 as it is now, making them even harder to kill, which according to the dev blog is the goal. The dev blog also states that players are frustrated because their tanks die too fast. They are not. That's the opposite of what people want. I just don't understand how one can misjudge the game and what the community wants by this much. I honestly don't understand how this is even possible. And also why Gaijin still insists on making these kind of decisions without ever asking the players first. Again, wasting a lot of time doing something that nobody asked for, just like nobody wanted the Ground Forces battle ratings to be compressed. Why not ask first? Anyway, that is just a little follow-up on the last tank feedback video, and this is it for this time. I hope it was informative, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.